Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Marketing You Practice podcast, the podcast where I have the pleasure of simplifying the marketing and the mindset so you, the chiropractor, can increase your income, your impact, and your enjoyment in practice too. All right, team, strap yourselves in. Today's guest is Dr. James Chestnut, and we're talking about how you can use science to build trust and elevate your marketing. James is one of the top 3 most influential mentors in my chiropractic career, and I credit him with helping me to solidify my certainty that gave me the freedom and the confidence to reach out to my community and share the chiropractic message. In this episode, James shares the simple fact that if our communities knew this, the utilization of chiropractic would absolutely skyrocket. He shares the emerging research on the safety and the effectiveness of the chiropractic adjustment. We talked about the pandemic that's currently sweeping the world that chiropractors are perfectly situated to solve. He explained why it is that chiropractors and traditional healthcare practitioners may never get along. And we discussed in depth the importance of certainty in growing your practice and communicating with your community. Without any further ado, let's go and chat with James. James Chestnut, welcome to the Marketing Your Practice podcast. How are you, my friend?
I'm well. Nice to see you. It's been a while.
It has been a long time. How long since you've been down here in Australia?
Probably 4 or 5 years. I mean, it was for sure, obviously, since the nonsense, but I think it was probably a year maybe before that. I don't actually recall, to be honest. It's been that long. So probably 4 or 5 years, I'm guessing.
Yeah. It's not often that I get the opportunity to thank in person the mentors, the people that have come in front of me for the profound impact they've had on my life. And I want to just start this off by sharing with the audience the impact that you've had, with the hope that maybe they can borrow from a little bit of that. You've got some upcoming seminars happening in Australia. There is no single person and no single book outside of the 14 foundational principles that's had more impact on my chiropractic life than you. I fell in love with chiropractic during college, and I fell in love with the philosophy of chiropractic, and it was very fulfilling for me to understand, the body's ability to heal itself, the role the nervous system played in it. But there was a piece that was missing for me, and that is the scientific validation. There was a level of impotence that I had that stopped me having the confidence I knew that was necessary for me to change my lives. And the moment I first met you, which was over at a Pyke seminar when you were standing up on the stage, the two changed all of that. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you. It's given me a bulletproofness now that I can talk with anybody of any age, of any profession, of any expertise about the science that underpins what we do. There too, you've helped me out with the question that, where did you read that and can I have a copy? So I want to just, from the bottom of my heart, and I know there's probably a lot of people that say this to you, I can't begin to understand some of the trials and tribulations that you have been through. But I want to thank you very, very much for what you've helped me do and have helped me to share with other chiropractors. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome, and I appreciate the sentiment and the words. Thank you.
Can you start off by perhaps giving a brief background? There'll be lots of new listeners that wouldn't have seen you when you're here in Australia. Of course, we've got a global audience that are listening to this, of the journey that brought you to become a chiropractor and then do the great work that you do now?
Yeah. So I was at the University of Victoria I was playing rugby on a scholarship, and I was also doing a master's degree in exercise physiology with a specialization in neuromuscular adaptation. So I was kind of the neural guy in the exercise physiology side, and I got hurt playing rugby as a 190, maybe 195 at the start of the season, down to 185 for a flanker. I just had a huge man, probably close to 300 pounds, tackle me and land on me sideways. And it squished me sideways, and it just messed up mostly my scapula, my rib, and things I'm aware with now, my neck, which are of course still highly related. And so a long story short is that I suffered for an enormous amount of time. I lost all the strength in my right arm. It was obviously neurological because I didn't change the size of my muscle cross-sectional area instantly, but I certainly changed my ability to recruit it, which I understood quite well because I was doing a master's degree in that work. So I went to everybody. Because I was a scholarship athlete, I got to the front of the line with everybody. The sports medicine guy who was teaching at UVic and worked for the Olympic team. I got to the neurologist at the head of the line. I got everything at the head of the line, and no one could help me. And I finally, a guy his name is Steve Parker, and he still lives in Victoria, and he's almost retired. He was a physical therapist for the university, and I got to be good friends with him. And he finally said to me one day, "Jimmy, go to a chiropractor." This is a physical therapist. And he goes, "You just need to go to a chiropractor." And I'm like, "A chiropractor, you know what?" And so I talked to the sports medicine guy. I won't name him because I'm going to have to say some truthful negative things about him in a minute. But he basically said, "Do not go to a chiropractor. They'll hurt you. Don't go, don't go, don't go." But he had nothing to offer me other than drugs. And the neurologist, when I went to the neurologist, was actually a South African guy, rugby player. And he said, basically, and what I learned about neurologists then, and he's very honest about it. He goes, "I don't treat, I diagnose. I don't have interventions. And your diagnosis is you've got some kind of neurological issue. I don't know, what it is. You could have stretched or damaged a nerve. He didn't touch me in any way, did no examination, basically just did a few little nerve conduction tests and basically said you've got nerve issue. And basically, same thing, there's nothing you can do about it. Just wait. And, in the meantime, do pain relief and, whatever. And so anyway, the physiotherapy, did the wands and all the other stuff he could do, but he basically said, you got to go to a chiropractor. So I did. And it was really an interesting experience for me. And it was probably in a way shaped me in a lot of ways, which I didn't realize until later. But the chiropractor gave me instant relief almost. He's like, first guy to put his hands on me, check my neck, check my rib. He goes, "Your rib's out, your neck is out," and he adjusts me, and I had instant relief. I mean, I'm talking, it would be hard to explain the excruciating pain I was in, but it was probably 5 to 6 months of feeling like I had a knife in my shoulder blade. And there was a knot in there that the massage therapist couldn't work out. I couldn't turn my neck, and I just kept trying to get back on the field, because that's everything to you when you're a young man playing a sport like that. And anyway, and so it was just like I just knew immediately I had something wonderful happen. It wasn't completely resolved by any stretch, but then the guy opened his mouth, and he started telling me about what he had just done and what it worked. And of course, he didn't know, but I was literally doing graduate work in neurology. And what he was saying to me was nonsensical. But he was helping me enormously. And so it got so bad that I couldn't go anymore and listen to him because it was just so, and I didn't want to, I was very grateful for the help this guy was giving me. So I changed chiropractors and ended up with complete total relief. My strength came back, getting my neck adjusted, getting my rib adjusted, and it was just a phenomenal experience. And so I had already been accepted to do a PhD with a full fellowship, meaning they were going to pay me, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden I was like, you know what? This chiropractic thing's pretty interesting. And so I started, I'm very analytical, you probably know. And I was like, I don't know. And then so I talked to a few people about it, and everybody said, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. My dad's a PhD, chiropractic. What? I got an uncle who's an MD. What? Chiropractic? No, my PhD, one of my PhD supervisors for my master's degree, my outside examiner, who was the Olympic sports doctor, basically said, "Are you crazy?" And so I got a hold of the manga report because I started looking into it myself. And I read the manga report, and it blew my mind. And none of these people knew anything about chiropractic. When I asked them questions, because I had gone and done some research, none of them knew about any of it. And I realized for the first time in my life that the medical sort of academic establishment were ignorant and biased against chiropractic. I had no idea up until that time, but they were, it was so clearly obvious to me. So anyway, I went to chiropractic college anyway. And I almost quit my first year because coming from a graduate program that was very good. I had some very highly renowned physiologists that I was working with, and they were good. I mean, they taught me research methodology so well, and I conducted my own research study. I designed it, conducted it, published it. They were good at what they did. And when I got to chiropractic college, it wasn't a super high level education, to be honest. It just wasn't, in terms of the science part of it. And it kind of turned me off. And so I had reserved my spot to do this PhD, and I was flying home, and I was basically like, I'm going to quit at Christmas, my first year. I just didn't find it. It just wasn't suiting me well. And I picked up, I don't know why, but I picked up a book in the airport. I mean, I had no money, right? You know what it's like. I mean, luckily I was fighting forest fires, so I had a bit of money, but I picked up this book, and it was called Timeless Healing, The Biology of Belief. And it was written by Herbert Benson, who's the founder of the Mind Body Institute at Harvard University. And I had never bought a book in a library, but I had a long flight in front of me, and I bought that book, and it completely changed my paradigm in terms of science. And it made me understand that the paradigm of chiropractic, the philosophy, was correct. And so I stuck. And then I started spending almost all my time in the library. But I'm not recommending this to anybody else, but I just didn't go to a lot of the classes because I found them to be, it was just rote learning. It wasn't a challenge for me in any way academically. And so I went to the library because I had to figure out how chiropractic worked. The explanations that were given just made no sense to me neurologically. And so I just went on a quest. And everyone who knows me at school will tell you, where's Chestnut? He's in the library reading. And that, so I just started to do it. And that's basically what, you mentioned the book, the 14 Foundational Premises. All that came from my time at chiropractic college. I wrote that book basically during chiropractic college and just after. That was the work I was doing in chiropractic college. And so for me, I had to figure out a way. And I think similar to you, Angus, what you said, which is like there was this piece missing for you. Like it made sense to you and everything, but there was just this piece missing. Well, I had to fill that gap, or I couldn't. I'm just that kind of person. I can't say something that I don't believe is true. I'm not that person. And so I was no one else had written that 14 premises. So there was nowhere I could go to get that. And so I had to do it. I had to do the work because no one else had done it at that point. And so I did. And to my great sort of initially, I guess, somewhat surprise is that there were an awful lot of chiropractors who were really hungry for that material. And so I started practicing, but before I actually had my license to practice in British Columbia, I had already done my first seminar because I had a meeting with a local chiropractor, and I started talking to him about this stuff, and all he said was, his name was Bob Rowe, and he said, you've got to do a seminar. You've got to get this information out to chiropractors. And so he organized a seminar for me to do for BC chiropractors before I had my license. And I did that, and the response was just overwhelming with all these people who had been dying for what you were dying for, Angus, which was of scientific validation for what they kind of intuitively knew to be true, but didn't have the backing, right? Mm-hmm. And then, from there, and then I ended up doing a board review at Parker, a guy by the name of John D'Onofrio, God rest his soul, as they say. He's passed on now, wonderful man. He had taught me board review, and we'd gotten to know each other. And then he asked me, would you do a board review for me? And I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? I'll do it. I like teaching. I was a teacher before I went into science, and I ended up teaching at Parker College. And I was teaching a board review, and so I taught the biochemistry and the physiology and all this stuff in a way that was really about, I taught biochemistry as the body, how the body's intelligence can take a banana and turn it into eye tissue. You know what I mean? Like I taught everything through that chiropractic paradigm, which is, you've taken my course. And so next thing I know, Fab Mancini comes to the class that I'm teaching on the weekend, listens in for a little while, and says to me, listen, I've had about 20 students come to me. Would you work here? I said, no, I live in Canada. There's no thank you, but thank you so much for the offer. And he said, would you teach at a Parker seminar? And I said, what's a Parker seminar? And we kind of laughed. And he took me out. I remember it was Dave and Buster's. And And he said, listen, I want you to come and teach at a seminar. And I did. And that was it. I mean, it just went nuts. It just went nuts, Angus. And ever since then, I think from my own curiosity, and also I think, maybe a sense of moral obligation, or maybe just gratitude and just desire to really uplift the profession that I care so deeply about. I just decided that I was going to, my mission became that I wanted every chiropractor to have scientific certainty and practice success. Scientific certainty and practice success. Every chiropractor deserves to be as wealthy as they want to be because they do the most good. And I believe that. I think I could prove it. I know I can prove it. And so that's I'm sorry, that's long-winded, but I don't know if I don't get that question very often anymore. So it's kind of fun to go back, but that's how it became. That's how it started.
If by some form of magic that you could, insert into the brains of our communities information about chiropractic, what do they need to know to have more confidence in their local chiropractor?
And you're asking me now to speak to the public?
Well, I asked
mean, like, am I explaining what does the public need to know to have,
what does
or what does the chiropractor need to know to have more confidence?
No, I want to start with the public, because what I want the listeners to hear from this is that this is what you need to be sharing. So
right, okay,
yeah. So that's the angle. What do they not know about chiropractic? What are their false beliefs? If they knew this, what would give them more confidence in choosing chiropractors to be a part of their health team?
Well, I think the thing they need to know is that with no close second, chiropractic adjustment is the single most effective and cost-effective and safest intervention in the history of spinal health care. That since the 70s, all that's happened is that there's been more and more evidence in support of chiropractic and less evidence in support of every other alternative, from NSAIDs to muscle relaxants to corticosteroid injections to surgery to paracetamol to opioids to physical therapy modalities to every single thing that you can imagine that is available for spinal health care. Every single one of those things over the last 40 years has had the initial claims of being evidence-based and effective ripped away from proper research, and chiropractic has been nothing but built up with new evidence. And in fact, in 1993, when that manga report was written, what it said was that it wasn't, to the great surprise of PhD Pran Manga, probably the most preeminent public health professor in Canada at the time, who knew nothing about chiropractic when he was contracted by the Ontario government, in an effort, by the way, that was highly lobbied by the Ontario Medical Association to try to get rid of chiropractic. That's why they hired him, so that he could prove that there was no evidence for chiropractic, so they didn't have to fund it anymore. And he came to the exact opposite conclusion after he did the most thorough review in history on it was on back pain, but it was really spinal health. And basically his conclusion was, no, it's not chiropractic we should be questioning. It's whether or not medicine is safe, and whether or not medicine has any interventions that have evidence. It was incredible, life-altering, world-shocking, conclusions. And nothing has changed since then. There's not a single intervention that medicine has introduced since then that has a lick of evidence. And yet chiropractic, which hasn't changed a lick since 1993, the chiropractic adjustment, has had nothing but more evidence of safety, more evidence of effectiveness, more evidence of cost effectiveness. And the reason that is very simple, is that the linchpin to spinal health and to the health of the organ we call the spine, which houses obviously all the nerves and receptors and all those things, that's a vital organ which has a massive impact on the health of every other vital organ, including the brain, is that the linchpin to all of that is segmental motion and the neurology and blood flow that stems from it. And so as I say to everybody, stay calm and remember Hilton's law. And Hilton's law says that the nerve that innervates any joint also innervates all the surrounding tissues that cross that joint, all the tendons, ligaments, muscles, the capsule itself. And so and by the way, the area of the sensory motor cortex that controls that is all the same, right? It's all a unit, it's a motion unit. And so Hilton's law it explains chiropractic better than anything in many ways, is that you cannot have a proper healthy segment or any of the tissues of that segment be healthy, or any aspect of that motion unit, the neurology flowing from there to the brain and back. None of that can be healthy, or any of the areas of the brain that are affected by it, including autonomics and all the other things. None of that is possible without proper motion. And proper motion, especially the spine, a lack of proper mobility is pandemic in the industrial world, because we sit and we don't move through full range of motion on a daily basis. It's pandemic. And the only solution to that is to restore that motion, which restores the neurology, which restores the healthy tissues, which restores the neuromuscular coordination, which restores the input into the sensory motor cortex and the other areas, the limbic part of the brain and all those things. And the only way to restore that and create healthy spine, vital organ, and all the other organs that are affected by it directly is to restore motion. Drugs can't restore motion. Passive physical therapies can't restore motion. Surgery doesn't restore motion. There's only one thing that restores motion. And there's only one profession that's actually highly expert and trained to find segments that aren't moving properly, regardless of whether they hurt or not. And that's chiropractic. And that is why chiropractic has been so incredibly successful and beat all odds against all these people and all this money who have tried to get rid of us, because chiropractic represents an instead of profession, not an in addition to profession. And so we've been attacked because we don't say that like a physical therapist will say, you should do everything your medical doctor tells you, take all the drugs that you're prescribed, get surgery if you want to, and we'll either help you with physical therapy after your surgery, or we'll help you with it before, or we'll do all these things. And I'm not saying that there's not some benefit to that. That's not my argument. My argument is that they do everything in addition to. And chiropractors have stood early on and said, no, you should do this instead of. Drugs are unhealthy. They don't work. As the benefits of drugs go rapidly down, the side effects go rapidly up. There's no evidence for them, by the way, no evidence for NSAIDs, according to Cochrane, no evidence for paracetamol, according to the Cochrane review, and to other systematic reviews. No evidence for back surgery. Ian Harris is an Australian, wrote a fantastic book about back surgery. He's an Australian orthopedic surgeon. But I mean, the evidence is so clear in the literature. And so, we are a threat. We represent, this is what chiropractors have to understand. We represent an enormous threat to the paradoxy of drugs and surgery. And it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so I think sometimes chiropractors who don't know what I just said, who couldn't cite all the evidence to support everything I just said, and I can, as you know, and have, they often get beat up, and they start to doubt whether or not they actually are the world's leading experts with the world's most evidence-based intervention. And we move away from the adjustment, and we get convinced to move towards other things that are more accepted but have less evidence. Science is not a consensus endeavor. Science is a data-driven endeavor. And so it doesn't matter how many people accept the modalities instead of the adjustment, because it's, part of that system. It only matters what the data says, and the data is clear. And when chiropractors know that deep inside themselves, and you can't build that with philosophy, that's a scientific issue. You need the philosophy. You need the philosophy as the window and the paradigm to see all the science and how to apply it clinically. But you need the science of the evidence to have that certainty that what you're doing is in the best interest of the patient, and to do it long enough over a proper duration with frequency that's long enough to make sure that you give your patients the chance to respond. And that's really the entire focus of my seminar coming up in Australia. in November. And the entire focus of my professional life now is to take this evidence and to make it so pragmatic and so easily communicated to patients in a systematized way that it addresses the issues of why chiropractors don't give proper care recommendations, right? They don't give it, they don't do a proper exam and report and proper care recommendations, and why patients often don't follow them. And the reason patients don't follow proper care recommendations, number one reason is they don't get one. And the number two reason is because they have not learned and been communicated in ways that are targeted at what exactly a patient needs to know and believe in order to stick around long enough to experience what chiropractic has to offer. And so that's my entire focus now, is creating a system that chiropractors can use to do that. But they need the scientific certainty first.
Can you share a little, because we talked about the pandemic of lack of proper motion, particularly with regards to the spine. Can you share some of the old and then the emerging science in terms of the impact that that might be having beyond the spine itself?
Sure. So I don't know. Are you familiar with Rady's book Spark? It's an older book.
Yes.
I mean, when I say older, I mean
that was a school teacher, wasn't it? Got his kids running in the morning.
Well, he had the story. Rady is actually a neuroscientist, but
yes.
he had the story in there of the teacher from Chicago, actually,
yes.
who got the kids running in the morning. And so, you know, there is widespread recognition now that movement is an essential nutrient for brain function, but not just in terms of cognition, which we've kind of known for a while. And you'll remember, even from the 14 Premises book, you know, some of the research I put in there about that. But now also not just intellectual, but emotional. So we now know that this movement is kind of like this windmill that produces this kind of electrical energy into the brain. And as it turns out, we are hardwired to number one, we are a creature that has evolutionary, in an evolutionary sense, we are meant to move all day. In other words, that's what humans require, and that's what we always did. And so the design has always been that how do we utilize that movement in a way that so we're literally moving beings. Our brain is a receptor organ, and the vast majority of what the brain receives in terms of stimulation comes from movement sense, much more than visual or hearing or anything else. And as it turns out, the brain is actually hardwired to require movement in order to not just for sensory motor, but also for cognition and for emotions, like Jeremy Schmallman's work, the cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome, and those things that you'll remember. Jensen's work on, learning with the body and mind, all the stuff they did when they looked and they compared, first of all, they compared, more time in the classroom versus moving more, and the moving more, the kids did better with grades. And then they did it with behavior. Then they did it in a bunch of schools in New Zealand and Japan. Then they did it in prisons. And I mean, like everywhere. And then Rady did all his great work and stuff. And so what we now know is that movement is a requirement for neural hormonal balance, for autonomic balance, and for neural hormonal balance. And when you take movement away, you immediately, not only do you see within one day, even in Olympic athletes, a change in insulin sensitivity, in terms of scar tissue adhesions in the joints, in terms of an inflammatory response, which increases nociception, which is a stressor which acts on the amygdala and the locus coeruleus, and then starts to produce more stress hormones, also drives you towards sympathetic dominance. And so it's really interesting to see. And sitting is the new smoking. Well, why? And sitting is the new smoking because it's a lack of movement, and that literally changes your entire ecosystem towards sympathetic dominance and insulin resistance and lowered immune function and everything else. But it's not the aerobic part of movement, because you can get the same, like Rady and all these people, like if you took the aerobic, you don't increase the heart rate, but you do Tai Chi, or you do some other kind of real big movements of Feldenkrais or some of these other sort of things, is that you get the benefit. It's the neurological part of it, not the cognitive. Now there's no, or aerobic, but no, there's no doubt that the cardiac part increases oxygen flow and everything else, but how do you actually increase oxygen flow to any tissue? You have to neurologically fire that tissue. So when you do a functional MRI of a brain, it gets more blood flow from movement than it does thinking.
Right.
Right? And so what I always try to explain to people is life is about two things. It's about nerve flow and blood flow, but nerve flow comes first and it dictates blood flow. No tissue gets engorged with blood unless it's innervated, not just innervated, but stimulated, recruited. So you recruit your brain when you move, you recruit your brain when you think as well, but movement especially. And so nerve flow, blood flow, nerve flow, blood flow. And what we now can say with certainty is that movement is the great initiator of nerve flow, blood flow throughout the body, everywhere.
Is there, James, are all joints the same? Is there a difference in quality or quantity of the movement stimulation to the brain that might happen between my fingers, my knee versus my spine? And I know, there's a big difference between even the upper cervical part of my spine, but why the spine? Is there any difference? Should we be just focusing on getting all joints moving? I mean, obviously we should, but is there an importance?
I don't think there's any question that well, let me explain it this way, Angus. That's a really good question. And so, and one which I pondered for a long time till I was able to find the answer. And so the reason the upper cervical is so powerful, and an ankle, by the way, and the thumb, right, like super highly innervated, is because it's dose responsive. And so when I say dose responsive, most people I'm sure understand what I mean, but I mean dose of input. So the afferent input from moving your neck is vastly different because of the density of proprioceptors in those muscles in your upper neck, right? Compared to other areas of your spine. It's more, you have like, I think it's 10 to 40 times more receptors per square centimeter or millimeter per square millimeter in your upper cervical area than you do in the lumbricals, the most important part of make us human, right? And you also have a lot in your ankles too, in your feet, but ankles, because that's, in terms of balance and upright posture and all those things. So it is dose responsive, and there is and you are going to get an enormously increased amount of dose of proprioception from moving or adjusting the upper cervical spine than you will others. Now, all areas are important. By the way, a lot of it is summated in the upper cervical spine. So the upper cervical spine has an effect on the lower extremity as well, because the ansa cervicalis and all these things, they also summate from other areas. It's very interesting. And I know Heidi's done some of that work where, you adjust the neck and it changes the actual recruitment of the anterior tibialis. And you're like, how, wow, but anyway, so yes, there is definitely a difference in terms of which. So I always say to people, look, if I could only adjust one area, where would I adjust? I'd adjust the upper cervical spine. The good news is I'm not limited to that. And are there other areas that can have a massive impact on neurology and your health and your spinal health? And can you have tissue degeneration there and scar tissue and other things? Yes, you can. So that's why I would say it makes total sense to adjust any joint that has lost mobility. Because if you lose mobility, you lose neurology. You lose neurology, you lose blood flow. You lose blood flow, you lose your ability to heal and all the other stuff. And you lose stimulation of the brain. And the other reason is why the spine is so important is because the axial spine moves all the time and it's all the weight bearing, right? So all the receptors for that are in there. So that we get the greatest bang for our buck. So we are neurophysiologically, evolutionarily designed to have all these receptors in our spine because that's our core and that's what changes. And the other interesting thing about the spine is, if you look at the spine, I'm going to try and, if you can imagine, these are two vertebrae. And if you imagine there was two pieces of gum in there that were the facet joints, I can't move any part of that spine without moving both, which means I'm stimulating both hemispheres every time I move the axial spine, which is very different than the extremities, which is also more powerful. And so that's another reason why the spine has such a greater impact.
I want to bring some perspective to this too, again, to those that are listening, and kind of link this in with, I'm passionate about chiropractors being a voice in their community, whether that be through digital media or communicating with different local groups there too. And people are often asking me, like, what do I say? And I help create videos for them and content for them. The important thing, and I'm often, as I do that, is to remind them that in communication, the words that you actually say are at best maybe 10% of the message that's communicated. There are pace and tone, but underneath it's who are you and who is the confidence and the certainty that you are delivering it with. And so many chiropractors do not have the base to be getting up there and to say, when it comes to care of the spine, there is no better profession trained than us as a chiropractor. There's nothing that has better evidence, nothing has better safety. And that's, I'm hoping our listeners can get a hold of this as well. And for those of you that are Aussies, November 11th, James is here. But I'm assuming, James, is this going to be another seminar that you'll take around the world? And
yeah, I'm going to do the UK. Actually, I'm doing the UK in October. Then I'm coming down. Like, this is my new everything. So that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. So yeah, so this is going to go everywhere. And the other thing is that I now have all that, I have all the modules for that 14 premises book now. So the module 1 is now all online, available to chiropractors, and so is module 2 for the nutrition and Think Well is, I don't know if it's up yet, but so all the stuff that you can now learn online. So if you can imagine taking that book to 14 premises, updating it, to the most recent, adding the most recent research. Well, there's 12 hours of that that they can get online now. So there's no reason that any chiropractor can't be certain, because the level of evidence which I've accumulated is irrefutable. It's indisputable. It's like, I'm not going to lose a debate against anybody, as you know, and I'm sure you won't either. But this is it's interesting to hear you say it, because when I first started, Angus, one of the biggest surprises I had, I'm kind of this weird hybrid, right, where I'm sort of half academic and researcher and half clinician, right? So research bored the shite out of me. I just couldn't stand. I like working with people, but the critique of research and looking into it and whether or not their methodology was correct, and whether or not their conclusions matched what they did. Like, I just had a natural affinity and ability for that. So I love reading research, but I don't like the minutia of doing it. It takes so many hours to conduct a study that I could read and critique thoroughly in an hour. That's a year's work. It just didn't do it for me. Mm-hmm. And so, but I loved the clinical part of it. And so at the beginning of my professional life, I think I was trying to please the academic side of me too much. And I complicated it too much for practitioners. And, so it was interesting. And I've kind of gone the other way now, which is like, no, I've got to make this, I've got to, like you said, very, very, very sort of prophetically, no, let's talk to the patient. Because really what it's about is the chiropractor needs to learn how to talk to the patient, not to anybody else. And by the way, when you learn the little bit that you need to know to be an expert, I mean, honestly, there's about a dozen studies that if you're just familiar with them, you're like, it's lights out, you win. That's more than any other practitioner you'll ever meet. No medical doctor has a clue. Like, believe me. Like, so not that you're going to be worried about it anyway. All I'm saying is that what I've realized is the biggest surprise to me when I started was that people kept coming up to me and telling me their practices exploded. And I'm like, but I didn't say anything about anything. I didn't say anything. At the beginning, I wasn't even saying this is what you should say to your patient, or this is what you should do in an exam, or whatever. All I did was share. Like, if you look at that 14 premises book, there's no clinical stuff in it. But the certainty level went out of the roof. And like you said, it's not just, I'm sure I changed a little bit about what they said, but what they said became congruent with what they knew and believed and were certain about. And it changed the way the patients responded to the recommendations and to what they said. And that was a real sort of interesting thing for me. But then what I realized was there's two things that have to occur. The doctor has to become certain and have cultural authority in their community and with their patients, but they also have to have the ability to communicate. And they have to communicate, they have to preemptively answer the patient's questions and concerns. And that exam and report are the most highly motivated time for the patient They're highly motivated and they've already picked you. So stop selling chiropractic in the exam and report. They already bought chiropractic. They're already there. So we're so busy trying to explain, you know what I mean? And I'm like, no, that'll come later. Right now, they're highly motivated for whatever reason. They came in your office and they're willing to give you their money. So what you have to do in those first two is you have to, number one, you have to walk into that room with certainty, right? And so that's a big part of, but I can do that in a couple hours now, right? And then the rest of it is, how do you take that certainty and turn it into compliance and retention and referrals? Because certainty by its own is useless. It only matters if they're getting adjusted. It doesn't matter how smart the chiropractor is, doesn't matter how certain the chiropractor is, doesn't matter what they know, doesn't matter. None of it matters. What matters is, are they coming in and getting adjusted and for long enough that they're going to get a benefit? Because when they get a benefit and they've had the experience, now they're going to refer. So if you want to build the practice everybody wants, you have to start with the certainty, right? It has to be that certainty, bulletproof certainty. Understanding that what you're going to recommend is true, that you're not saying it because you want to increase your PVA or increase your bank account. Like I always say, I don't want you to have the idea that I want you to do whatever it takes to be successful. I want you to have this attitude, which is, I'm willing to do the right thing to be successful. And when you understand that the right thing is exactly married to the best thing for you and the patient, that you're going to build your practice the most, you're going to get the best outcomes, you're going to have the best income. All of those things are congruent. And that's when it explodes for people. That's what I notice now is the thing that really, when people's practices and their enjoyment of what they're doing takes off. The CAs love it, the docs love it, the patients love it. That's a successful practice, right? Everybody's getting what they want from the practice, the patient, the staff, and the doctor. That's success. But that requires certainty. It requires an exam and report that are based on the evidence, that are based on getting these patients in for a long enough time and enough duration so that they can experience the benefits of chiropractic care. And without that, you're not going to have a successful practice, because everybody wants a self-sustaining, successful practice, which is getting referrals and new patients, but also a very significant percentage of people who are coming regularly because they choose it, that it's a patient-centric, the patients have chosen to come. They've made, and that is an enjoyable practice. So yes. It's also the most lucrative for the patient and the doctor. The patient gets the most out of it at that point. No patient wants to be in pain, right? What the patient wants is to have is to be comfortable and mobile and have a high quality of life, and to enjoy an interaction with an expert. Patients love to learn stuff that makes their life better. They love an interaction with an expert who cares and is compassionate and is confident. That's what patients want. What kind of dentist do you want? Someone who's not really sure what they're telling you and gives you 5 different things. Well, you could do this or you could do that. Or do you want somebody who's kind, compassionate, and confident and authoritative? And that's what chiropractors lack, in my opinion, Angus. I don't know what your experience is, but I've noticed that many of them they're certainly not picking that up from school. I think that's fair to say.
No,
so they've got to get it from somewhere else.
Many of us have been raised as second-class health practitioners. What you described at the end there is exactly my experience. I want to encourage all of our listeners. One, can you do me a favor? Please share this episode. I know that you've got peers that need to hear this. And two, I'll have links in there. James, whether you're Aussie or in the UK, wherever it is, to come along and see him live. It'll be a different experience for you. And if that's not available to you, head on over to the website. At the very least, buy that book, do the online course through there too. Implement it. It will pay dividends for you. James, thank you so much for today, buddy. It's always a profound pleasure for me to chat with you. I look forward to seeing you in a month's time. I'm going to bring my boy there, who's in his 2nd year of studying, and I'm very excited. Wow. Buddy, I cannot tell you the level of excitement I have to share you with him as well. So thanks again, mate.
Hopefully we get a meal or something, after if you guys are if you're sticking around, I'd love to take you out for dinner, and your son.
That would be
of course. I love to take a student out for dinner, man.
Yeah,
Isn't that great, right? Like, isn't that the thing that we experienced, right, when we were young?
yeah, it's stunning, buddy.
That's one of my favorite things to do and I love it when it's a second or third generation. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, thank you, mate. From the bottom of my heart, I look forward to seeing you, in a couple of months' time from here also. So safe travels. And again, thanks for sharing so freely today.
Thanks, Angus. Thanks for having me. And thanks again for those nice words at the beginning. I appreciate it.
Pleasure. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer Program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.